what near-death experiencers would say is that someday you and I are going to relive this moment, and I will know what it is to be you, and you will know what it is to be me.
Hello,
Right?
everyone, and welcome to the channel within. I am excited to be speaking with Dr. Janice Holden today, as she serves as the president of IANDS, International Association of Near-Death Studies, and I am hoping that you guys are equally excited. Welcome, Dr. Holden, and thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Mira. I'm really happy to be here.
So, if we can get started with you telling us a little bit about how you got involved or how did this calling find you?
Yeah. Um, well, growing up, I grew up in the Chicago suburbs and was always interested in things that couldn't be easily explained. And I guess to fast forward a little bit, when in 1978, I read Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, which is the book that is now credited with opening the contemporary field of near-death studies. And at the time, I was reading just out of interest, but in the mid 80s, I was working on my doctoral dissertation. And to make a long story short, I tried five different things, and each one aborted until finally I tried something related to near-death experiences, and that's the one that went through. So, and once I started researching them, I was just absolutely hooked, and I'm still so fascinated. You know, at the International Association for Near-Death Studies, if you're a member, you receive in your email box about once a month a monthly NDE. And one of our volunteers goes into our experiencer registry and finds one that's interesting and sends it out to all the membership. And no matter what I'm doing, when I see that come into my email box, I almost always stop what I'm doing and read this NDE. I've read, talked with, heard from like probably more than 1,000 near-death experiencers, and I'm still so fascinated by the phenomenon. It's really unendingly interesting.
So, before we go on, how can those interested become members so that we too can read up about these NDEs?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Well, um, they can just go to www.IANDS, and that stands for International Association for Near-Death Studies.org. And there's a tab there for joining. And there are other advantages to joining. The website is available to anybody, and there's a lot of rich information about NDEs and related experiences there. But joining gives perks like the monthly NDE, access to our quarterly magazine, Vital Signs, that has all kinds of interesting articles about NDE related things, and discounts on our symposia and our conference. We hold a conference usually. It's once a year, usually over the Labor Day weekend, so the very end of August, beginning of September, and in various locations around the country. The 2026 conference will be in the Seattle, Washington area. And then we also hold an online one-day spring symposium. And the symposium this year will be April, whatever the last Saturday in April is. It might be April 30th, something like that. And it will be on near-death experiences and suicide, that specific topic. So anyone can join that and attend that seminar online. And again, if you're a member, you get a little discount on the registration.
That sounds really good. Thanks for that information, Dr. Holden.
Well, I guess first, just to describe or define what a near-death experience is, I usually explain it in terms of five aspects. And you might think of these as phases or stages, but actually, I call them aspects because, especially the three middle ones, can occur in any order. So even though the order I'm about to tell you is what happens in most cases, it's different for different people. So the experience might begin with this. Well, first of all, the person usually is in some kind of medical crisis or other extreme circumstance. We've learned since the um, naming the phenomenon near-death experience that this experience actually is a an extreme circumstances experience. And so people can have it not only when they're in medical crisis or even in actual cardiac arrest, but also when they're running a 25K and they're extremely exerted, or they can be extremely emotionally aroused, like extremely jealous. So, or extremely relaxed in like meditation, or under the influence of psychedelic medication. So, but probably the single best facilitator of this experience is being close to death and physical death. And so the person might begin by feeling their consciousness leave their body. Not everybody has this part of the experience. Sometimes they just find themselves in the next aspect suddenly without the sense of having left. But for those who do have the perception of their consciousness leaving their body, it can happen any way. It might be the top of their head or the tip of their toes or from their chest, or they might just feel themselves lift into out of their body as a whole. So it varies from person to person about exactly how the leaving happens. And then typically the person finds themselves outside their body, usually above, looking down on the scene surrounding their physical body. And they sometimes recognize their body right away and sometimes don't. Like there have been cases where a person was looking down and thought, oh my goodness, look at that woman down there. She looks like she's in really bad shape. My, wait, wait a minute. That's me. No, this is me. I must be dead. And so the realization can come on, that way. The person can also not only perceive the location around their body, but they can move to different locations in the physical world at the speed of thought. So they might think, I wonder what mom's doing right now. And then, boom, they're there wherever their mother is, watching her do her thing. And so perception during this aspect of the experience is what I call normal plus, meaning that my blue top would still look blue from that perspective. But but I also can, like in physical life, I can't see my fingers back here, except I can see them in the camera, but physically I can't see them. But in an NDE, people say that they have global perspective. They can direct their perception in any direction and see in that direction. They also talk about being able to both see and see through physical objects like walls. So they can see the wall or they can see a door. But when they try to grasp the handle, their quote unquote hand goes right through it in their, spiritual body, so to speak. And some people actually perceive themselves to have like a physical body, and others perceive themselves to be just like a an emanation of energy. Anyway, they can move through these physical objects. And a lot of times, NDErs will say they rose through the ceiling and through, like if their body is in a hospital, through the levels of the hospital up into the night sky or whatever. Um, and and people also can hear what people in the area are thinking that they are not actually voiced. They can hear conversation, but they also can hear people's thoughts that are not vocalized. So there are these, they can see like we do in the physical world, but with additional abilities. And so in this phase, people usually feel very peaceful. They report feeling no pain, no matter how much pain their physical body was in right before they left their body. They say that they feel no pain. A lot of times they'll say that they recognize that that body is theirs, but they don't really feel attached to it. One NDER told me they could have cut off the head and I wouldn't have cared. There's this sense of disengagement from the physical body. And there's also, let me think, that there was one more thing I wanted to say. Oh, that people can visually zoom in and zoom out and even zoom into like the cellular level of things going on, or zoom out to a big perspective. So there are all these additional perceptual abilities that people have. And also, in addition to feeling no pain, they usually feel very much at peace and a sense of well-being. Sometimes they're frustrated because they see like there are people scurrying around trying to resuscitate their body and all worried and concerned, and they're trying to communicate, it's okay, y'all. I'm fine. I'm up here. I'm perfectly fine. You don't need to be so worried, but they can't get through. So there's no interaction, or I will say very rarely is there interaction with the material world. There's the ability to observe and perceive it, but not affect it or interact with it, usually. And then the next aspect is a transitional one. So the person might have this sense suddenly of moving rapidly through a darkness, some structure that might seem like a tunnel, or just the rapid movement, even in what seems like something related to the material world. But there's this rapid movement, and then and if the movement has to do with darkness and tunnel, which is most common, eventually, usually the person will perceive light. And it might be a light in the darkness or a light at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel itself might be light, but it gets brighter as the person moves rapidly, very rapidly through it. And then arriving at this light, the experiencer discovers that the light is actually a being. And this being of light emanates absolute knowledge of the person, absolute love of the person. So people, one of the most common things that people say is that as they enter this transmaterial dimension, a dimension beyond the material world, it feels like coming home, like they're where it feels familiar, like they've been here before, but they had forgotten in their physical life. In the presence of this light is when most often happens a phenomenon called a life review. And in this aspect of the experience, the person reviews and simultaneously re-experiences and simultaneously kind of observes, mm, like non-judgmentally, usually every moment of their life, and also experience being on the receiving end of their actions. So, what near-death experiencers would say is that someday you and I are going to relive this moment, and I will know what it is to be you, and you will know what it is to be me. And the upshot of that is that when in my lifetime, when I've done things that have enabled people to feel good, I feel how they felt good. If I did things that hurt them in some way, I feel that hurt. And so probably to jump ahead, this is the aspect of the experience that is most transformative because once people survive and remember their NDE, they realize that everything they do, it isn't just to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's that doing unto others is doing unto you, that you will experience whatever you do to other people in this experience.
That
Say,
is just so profound, Dr. Holden. And I have to tell you that when I heard the first one, it was so deeply impactful
uh,
that I changed the way that, or at
oh,
least, tried to change the way to do better, to be better, because I realized that even though it is said that it's done very non-judgmentally, I realized that, like you said, we are one and we are hurting ourselves, and that profoundly changed. Though I'm human, so of course but I remember that.
yeah, me too, Mira. And I'm so glad you said that because it's an illustration of how near-death experiences are not only transformative for the people who have them, but they're transformative for people who learn about them. Because we realize that, well, if it happened to that person and it happened to hundreds and thousands of people, it's likely going to happen to me. This applies to me as well. So that's a really, really good point. Yeah. Well, and as you pointed out, the people say that they do not feel judged by the being of light, although the being of light might comment that, well, you maybe could have done better here, or that sort of thing. They feel very not judged at all. They judge themselves, but don't feel externally judged. They feel, and one person said, it isn't even as if I felt forgiven because there was nothing to forgive. So that's kind of an interesting thing to try to wrap my head around. Anyway, then other things that can happen in this domain is that people might find themselves in a preternatural environment, that is, an environment that is kind of Earth-like, but it's quite different. Like there are colors that we don't have on Earth. There are sounds, music, other sounds that people say they've never heard on Earth. And every blade of grass has consciousness. There's telepathic communication. And by the way, the communication with the being of light, with other beings that we'll talk about in a minute, with things, objects, animals, it's all telepathic in this state of consciousness. And so there's like this immediate exchange of information, questions and answers, or just information. Um, and so uh, a lot of times people, find this preternatural environment just so beautiful and so wonderful. Sometimes people report going on to other locations, transmaterial locations, like cities of light, cities of knowledge, huge libraries of knowledge, and things like that. And sometimes, often, people meet uh, entities that are transmaterial. They're not material. So it consists primarily of deceased loved ones. People often meet beloved parents, grandparents, siblings, whatever, even friends, even pets, animals. People have met their deceased pets. And the other kind of spirit of transmaterial entity is spiritual entities that are like, it might be a spirit guide, it might be somebody that the experiencer recognizes or doesn't recognize. Sometimes the experiencer will say, I was accompanied by this spirit guide who I knew them like a friend, but I didn't remember how I knew them. But I just knew that we had known each other forever. Um, and sometimes they're identifiable religious uh, entities, like someone might meet Yama, the god of death, or might meet Jesus, or some a Buddhist entity, even though Buddhists don't focus on afterlife, still those entities are encountered. Um, and
I have a question
yes,
surrounding that. I know that I've seen atheists meet Christ.
yes.
However, is there a correlation between beliefs like Hindus will meet Yama and Christians meet Christ, or not necessarily?
Yeah, no, actually, what research has shown is no relationship between beliefs or expectations and what actually happens. And I like to say, kind of smugly, you can believe whatever you want about what's going to happen to you when you die, but based on the eyewitnesses, here's what's going to happen. Yeah, so yeah, and even people who I just recently read an account of a person who had an NDE and they knew about NDEs before they died. And they're like, they immediately went into the light, but they didn't go through a tunnel. And they're like, where's my tunnel? And because, none of the features is universal. So
I have
yeah, so
another question
uh
about the loved ones. Sometimes we do have estranged family members. Did you come across um, where they are able to reconcile on the other side, or is it if I have a desire not to meet that person would not show up?
I don't know about if I have a desire not to see them, can I make it so that they don't appear? People can definitely encounter loved ones who were estranged in physical life. And usually, what they encounter is that the loved one is essentially apologetic for whatever their role was in the estrangement. And they usually have a bigger spiritual perspective and regret any ways that they hurt the experiencer. So when that happens, it's usually a very much a reconciliation.
That's very comforting to know.
So back to the experience. Um, in the transmaterial domain, some other kinds of things can happen, but I think we've touched on the main ones. And then the final aspect, the fifth aspect, is the perception of returning to the physical body. Now, the experience can end in any of a number of ways. So the person might be communicating with a spiritual entity who tells them that they have to go back, that their time on earth has not ended. So the experiencer might be with a spiritual entity who tells them that it's not their time to die, that they still have work to do on earth. And that spiritual entity might be an unidentifiable one, or it might be a deceased loved one. And the experiencer, this experience feels so good for most people that they do not want to leave. And even people who have young children on Earth and that sort of thing, it can be really hard to accept having to leave this wonderful place. And but in these cases, they're told they have to return. There's no arguing. They might argue, but there isn't any arguing, and they'll either feel themselves go backwards, like through the tunnel, or they might just feel themselves return to their physical body. And if they do feel a return to the physical body, it again can be in a number of different ways, through the head, the toes, whatever. Um, and another uh, scenario is that the person is given a choice by the spiritual entity. And the choice is that they can stay and move on, or they can return to Earth. And when, of course, the only people we ever hear from are the ones who chose to come back, right? But in virtually every case I've ever read, when they choose to come back, it's because of a love relationship with someone on earth who really still needs them and would really have a hard time in life if they didn't come back. And so, love is the link between people. Okay.
It is such a beautiful message of unconditional love on the other side. And then love is the link that brings us back. So
Yeah.
I heard you speak about that before, and I thought it was just so
Yeah.
profoundly beautiful.
It really is. And it's amazing to see this theme recur over and over in different people's near-death experiences. Yeah. And then another way that the experience can end is that the person's just tooling along in the NDE and suddenly, boom, they just are back in their body with no warning whatsoever. So it can end, any of a number of ways. Um, and so that's the experience itself. A few other points. Time during near-death experiences tends to speed up, slow down, lose all meaning. It changes in some way, and most people end up saying that time is actually, and our perception of time is an illusion, that there really is no time. Everything, and people will say in the experience everything happened at once, but because on Earth we're so sequential, they turn their experience into a sequence. But they say, they need to be clear that in the experience everything happened at once. People sometimes see future lives, past lives. They sometimes see the future in this current lifetime, and and I mentioned that communication is telepathic, and I'm sure there's one other thing that I'm forgetting to say that's a feature of near-death experiences in general. But yeah, and people. Oh, here's the other thing. There is some aspects of the experience are involuntary. It happens to the person, and some aspects are voluntary, like the person being able to zoom in and out or go to different locations at will, and being able to even argue about if they're being sent back and they don't want to come back, they might argue. But then there are other aspects of the experience that are involuntary, like the person might be observing their operation, their surgery from the ceiling in the material aspect of the experience, and suddenly feel a pull to look behind them, and then they're drawn into this tunnel, so they didn't choose that. So it's an interesting combination, kind of like life on Earth, that some things are not negotiable and other things are. Yeah.
Thank you for that for that overview of what happens in a near-death experience.
Yeah, you're
Um,
welcome.
in researching over 1,000, do you have a favorite that really stood out?
Well, it's really hard to choose because every experience is revelatory, you know. Maybe one that comes to mind, a couple come to mind. One is that of Anita Moorjani, who you know her story, yeah,
Yeah.
and which I highly recommend if anybody wants to read or listen to a book. Her book, Dying to Be Me, is outstanding, and she had end-stage lymphoma and was in the process of dying, and her organs were shutting down and so forth. And she had this profound near-death experience, and she made a complete recovery and a rapid, inexplicable recovery from being really in the first stages of death. So she had, like, one of the things that is unique in her experience that I just love is this is toward the end of her NDE. She's with her deceased father. They're looking down on the hospital room where her physical body is lying. Her husband is there, her mother is there. I think by this time her brother has arrived as well. And and she and her father are talking, and her father's saying, "It's time for you to decide." And she's like, "Decide what?" And he said, "If you're going to go back into that body." And she said, "How in the world could I possibly go back into that body? It's so practically dead." And she said, "Plus, a nurse just came and took blood. And isn't that blood work going to show that my organs are continuing to shut down and the body is dying?" And her father said to her, "The decision you make right now, this in this moment, is going to determine the outcome of that blood test." Now, that's so opposite of how we think in this world. We think you take the blood, it is what it is, the result is going to be what it is. But what he was saying is that our intentions can influence the physical world. And that certainly is characterized by other people's experiences, but I thought that one was particularly poignant. Um, so hers is wonderful. And then another one that comes to mind is Mary Neal, who's an orthopedic surgeon. And she drowned in a South America river in a kayaking accident. And she was underwater for a little over 30 minutes. And yet she survived and is not affected apparently in any way. She went back to being an orthopedic surgeon, but after a very severe injuries and a lot of recuperation and physical therapy and all that. But she's back to normal, and her experiences is especially striking, not only in the content of the experience itself, but all these miraculous things that happened around her NDE. For example, they were in a remote area of Central or South America, and with no hospitals or anything within, hundreds of miles. And yet, when they had pulled her out of the river, resuscitated her, and were carrying her up to the road, there was an ambulance waiting there. And it's like, how can that be? It was just miraculous. And there were other miracles associated with her story. So it it's very, very well worth reading her book as or listening to her book as well.
Thank you for those two beautiful stories.
Near-death experiencers say they realize after their NDE that are they are accompanied always by spiritual entities, and that all of us are. We may be completely unaware of it, but we are surrounded and supported by spiritual entities, and they can't. And I think, one of the questions about life, of course, is why is there this suffering, so much suffering in the world, and 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 why doesn't God, or why doesn't spiritual force like rescue us from suffering? And the reason is that NDErs come back with tends to be that through our suffering we advance in spiritual qualities. We become more compassionate toward others. We become more patient, more faithful, and or at least those are opportunities we have to derive from suffering. And so that's the reason why we aren't like rescued from it, because it actually is an opportunity for spiritual growth, which we may or may not take advantage of.
So that's the second thing that really impacted me deeply with NDEs. In addition to the life review, I started asking for help more because we have free will. And I will address now, out loud sometimes my guardian angels seeking their help. And so that was something also that was so helpful to me.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you for the reminder.
You're so welcome. And another whole topic around NDEs is how experiences are changed by the experience. And I like to categorize the changes. It's an arbitrary categorization, but it makes sense to me that they're like if you've written a letter and then you think of something afterwards, it's a PS. The after effects of near-death experiences I categorize as PSPS, and they're psychological, spiritual, physical, and social. And the psychological changes are people become first of all, they lose their fear of death because in many cases, they perceive that they were in the first moments of death and they realize that they still existed and existed with greater lucidity. That's another feature of the experience is that people perceive more lucidly and can think faster and that sort of thing. So it's like they exist in an even better state than in physical life. They also change their values and they become less concerned about material things, more concerned about being of service to other people, being helpful to others, making a difference not only to other people, but to animals and everything, to the world. They become more concerned about even the earth. And then spiritually, people tend to become more spiritual, less religious, but that doesn't characterize everybody. Some people get more into their religion after their NDE, but more often they find that religion, it's not that they disagree with it, they just find that it's not big enough to accommodate what they experienced in their NDE and now know to be the nature of the transmaterial world. And there's that, but they also tend to retain a connection, a sense of connectedness to that spiritual domain that they didn't have before their NDE. And many people develop what in some environments are called spiritual gifts, like the ability to see the future, the ability to telepathically know what someone else is experiencing, and even psychokinesis, which gets into the physical a little bit. So that's a good way to transition to the physical. That physically people find that their metabolism has changed. They find that they have different appetites for different foods, but also interestingly, they develop the ability to influence the physical world through thought alone. Now, usually it's not intentional. It's more like when they become emotionally upset, electronic things in their environment malfunction. And it's a very established phenomenon with near-death experiencers that doesn't happen even with people who survive a close brush with death but don't remember a near-death experience, which, by the way, is 80 to 90% of people who survive a close brush with death don't remember anything unusual. 10 to 20% will report a near-death experience. So yeah, they have this effect on the physical environment. And they tend to become more sensitive to like medication. They have to take only half what they took before to get the same effect and other kinds of things. And then finally, socially, you can imagine if a person has a sudden immersion into an alternate reality and people say absolutely this experience was real, even hyper real, realer than what it feels like for us to be talking right now. Um, that and then they are plunked back into their physical body and back into the world that as it was, but they are transformed. It really has repercussions in their lives. And so all these psychological, spiritual, and physical changes are going to reverberate in their social life. So people change friends, they change organizational affiliations. They even, if somebody's married at the time of an NDE, they're more likely to become divorced, and not because of like hostility and argument and that sort of thing, but because the near-death experiencers' values have changed so much, they've diverged from their partner so much that those people end up divorcing. Once in a while, there's a couple where the partner actually had more NDE-like values to begin with. And then this person has their NDE, their values converge, and those people continue in their marriages happier than ever. But that's the exception, usually because Western, especially Western values are very materialistic and all that kind of stuff. There's usually a divergence of values. Um, so, um, so it can take people one little study, near-death experiencers reported that on average, it took them 7 years to completely feel integrated again after their near-death experience. There was just so much to adjust to and change in their life and deal with and all that. So some people do, quicker than that, but other people can take longer than that. So yeah, so they're very impactful experiences.
I can only imagine, the thought process because you wonder if you're going crazy, if you imagined it, even though it's realer than real and hyper real, like you said. So it could take a little, time to actually do the download. But in terms of the scope or the population, in terms of the amount that has been disclosed, how many are negative NDEs? And
Yeah.
then do they stay in that realm or is there a possibility to turn it around if it's
Yeah,
initially negative?
that's a great question and a whole chunk of information that I bypassed in my previous talking. But yeah, I mentioned that of all the people who survive a close brush with death, only 10 to 20% report having had a near-death experience. Of those, about 90% report that the experience was predominantly pleasurable. Peace, joy, love dominated the whole experience. But about, as best we can guess, 10% say that the experience was dominated by distressing feelings. There might have been terror, horror, guilt, torment, those kinds of things that they perceived or that they either uh, observed or actually witnessed, experienced. And in many of these, well, first of all, um, the rarest kind of NDE is one where the person experienced some kind of torment. So it's not common, but it absolutely does happen. And in those cases where it has happened, uh, in many of those cases, at some point during the torment, the person thought of asking for help, asking for help from God or Jesus or some other spiritual or religious entity. And and in almost every case, when the person genuinely requested that help and reached out, they were reached back and extracted from the situation. And then the experience turned to a pleasurable experience. So there are two kind of takeaway messages. One is that we can't find any difference between people who report pleasurable and distressing experiences, and everybody who's researched distressing experiences has concluded that anyone can have a distressing NDE. But the other takeaway is that if one is prepared to ask for deliverance, deliverance almost certainly exists. And so that's an important thing to remember if one finds oneself in a distressing situation.
That is also very reassuring. And in terms of the cosmos, because we seem to be a speck in the universe, do they encounter humanoids or other types celestial beings?
It is. It's relatively rare, but I'm not sure whether the rareness is because it occurs rarely or people are a little more reluctant. Because I have a friend who, she has had two near-death experiences. In her first one, she was met by beings who were standing in front of a spaceship. And and she spoke about her near-death experience extensively for years and never mentioned the spaceship. She just said that there were these two beings and they communicated telepathically. Um, and so it may be that people have this experience more often and just are reluctant because of the social stigma or whatever, the disbelief in those phenomena. But they certainly do happen that people encounter, and people have sometimes seen past lives in on other planets where they were different life forms than human. And so there is this opening to different kinds of entities throughout the universe.
On a personal level, how has your own relationship with death and the divine changed over the years because of your work?
Yeah. Well, uh, first of all, it certainly has, like you, the life review has influenced me a lot. And like you, I'm human. I sometimes still behave in ways that I think, oh, that is not going to play well in my life review. But many times I make choices based on how something will play in my life review and choose a path of greater spiritual qualities, love, peace, faithfulness, patience, those sorts of things. Um, and I would have said up until a couple of years ago that learning about near-death experiences had extinguished my fear of death. But a couple of years ago, I had an experience in ketamine-assisted therapy that I know you know about, and and I had an experience there that really extinguished my fear of death, and as a result of that, which I don't want to, it would be too long to get into here about exactly what that is, but maybe we could talk another time about that.
I would
But
love that.
yeah, what it taught me is that learning about near-death experiences is definitely transformational for people. And there's nothing like the direct experience. So it's kind of like there are like three kinds of positions. One is to be ignorant of all this, another is to be informed as a witness to others' experience, and the third is to have the experience oneself. And certainly I would never encourage people to, you know, uh, try to temporarily kill themselves to have a near-death experience. There are other ways to have these transformational experiences, and that are life affirming and not life threatening. So yeah.
I have three last questions, but I would love to speak with you again
Okay.
in the future. Um, how, what brings you joy and laughter these days, Doctor?
Joy and laughter. Um, um, being with my friends, um, uh, traveling. I'm about to, in a few months, I'll be going to Portugal, and I look forward to discovering that new things, especially being with my husband, and actually continuing to do the work, like reading doing a near-death experience research study and having to read. I have to read more accounts of near-death experiences. It's like I was emailing one of my colleagues and saying, "This is my idea of a really good time."
That's really
So,
nice.
yeah. So I enjoy a lot about life. Yeah.
That's beautiful. What would you say to young Janice who's about to embark on the most fascinating experience of her life in entering the NDE realm?
Oh gosh. Um, I would just say, don't worry. Everything's going to be fine.
And
Yeah, if I had known then what I know now, I would have been a lot less anxious. Um, on the other hand, the anxiety that I felt, early in my early career, I was like a secretary in a chemical corporation and a travel agent, and I know what I didn't know what to do with my life, and I actually had um, why am I blanking on it? An anxiety disorder. Um, and um, and I think, but once I found my sense of direction in life, first becoming a teacher, and I taught high school psychology, and I loved that. And then I became a counselor, and then a counselor educator, a researcher of near-death experiences, and all that. Um, uh, all of that went away. All that anxiety went away. But in a way, I look back at that anxiety as having been a motivator for me to keep searching for what would really bring meaning to my life. And to discover, I guess I would even say it different than that, to discover what I was really meant to do in this lifetime. And not everybody is destined to become like an educator or researcher. I mean, sometimes the purpose is to be a parent, be a grandparent, and those personal relationships that we think are just so mundane are so important. So anyway, yeah, I would tell my earlier self, I wouldn't change anything, but I would say, you will find you will find your your purpose. Yeah.
beautiful. What final message do you have for those listening?
Well, just that if they want to learn more about near-death experiences, I have a few suggestions. You mentioned Bruce Grayson's book After. It is wonderful and a really good overview of near-death experiences. And like Anita's book, Mary Neal's book, are really wonderful. And online, going to the IANDS website, and there's another website, Near Death Experience Research Foundation. It's www.nderf.org, and there are thousands of accounts of near death experiences from around the world. That's a great thing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holden, for
You're,
spending this time with me today. And
you're
I
so
hope
welcome.
everyone enjoys this as much as I did.
You're so welcome, Mira. It was my pleasure.